We know there are many choices in internet radio, and the staff and host of LA Talk Live would like to thank you for choosing the internet's hottest destination for the most eclectic sound and invigorating talk. This is LA Talk Live. We are more than just talk.
There's no combination of words I could put on the back of a postcard. No song that I could sing, but I can try for your heart. And our dreams, and they are made out of real things, like a shoebox of photographs with sepia tone loving. Love is the answer, at least.
Welcome, everyone. You are watching Pathways to Love. I am your host, Julie Orlov, and I'm delighted to spend another Friday afternoon with you. We are here every Friday, and I am dedicated to helping you create very intimate, strong, and powerful relationships in every area of your life. And I've been doing this work now for over 25 years as a psychotherapist, executive coach, speaker, and the author of the Pathway to Love books and programs. Now, we all know how important our relationships are, and we are in relationship with human beings from the second we are born. And our childhood experiences and the relationships we have with those adults and friends in childhood have such an incredible impact on how we are then able to develop our intimate romantic relationships in adulthood. So today's topic is extremely important. It's a very valuable conversation to have. And for those who might be listening and having children in the room, we also want to warn you that this may be a challenging topic for children, and you may want to send them off to play in their own room without a computer. Okay. So today's topic is actually called Overcoming Childhood Sexual Abuse. And I did a little research today on really what the statistics are in the United States about childhood abuse in general. And the census is telling us that there are over 6 million cases of child abuse that are reported yearly. And as a therapist, I can tell you for sure that means that the real number is significantly higher. And out of those 6 million reported cases, about 10% fall under the category of sexual child abuse. And we hear about it every day. And what I am here to say is that either you or someone you know, and actually whether you know it or not, because this is not a topic that people talk about openly and easily, I guarantee you has had some kind of impact from sexual abuse. And then there's a huge gamut. And we're gonna talk about what that definition is and what the range is. And actually the most important message is how do you overcome that so that you can go on to create intimate and loving and healthy relationships throughout your entire life. And it absolutely is possible. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our guest today. Our expert is Dr. Nancy Irwin. Welcome, Nancy.
Thank you, Julie. A pleasure to be here.
Thank you. And Nancy has a doctorate degree in psychology, and she has a powerful story to tell. And she specializes working with people who have suffered childhood sexual abuse. And she also works with perpetrators, which is a whole nother fascinating topic because people need to understand, and we're going to talk about this as well, that there are real human beings behind these terrible actions.
Yes.
So welcome.
Thank you.
And then, as always, I want to welcome my co-host today, Stephen Tako. Thank you for being here again, Stephen.
My pleasure, as usual.
Okay, and Stephen is a wonderful, talented actor, motivational speaker, and the author of Motivated to Act. So, without further ado, so Nancy, what happened in your life? Like, what led you to decide to work with survivors of childhood abuse and perpetrators?
Thank you. It's a great story, actually. My previous life before I became a therapist, I was a stand-up comic. And when you're a stand-up comic, you only work about 30 minutes a day. So I had a lot of time on my hands. And so I started volunteering in my community, and I chose a shelter for sexually abused teenagers. Perhaps people have heard of it. They're quite famous. It's Children of the Night over in Van Nuys. Well, I absolutely fell in love with it. It waked up the healer in me, and it also allowed me to begin really doing the work I needed to do to heal my own adolescent sexual abuse. I did uncover that previously when I was living in New York in a very sort of dramatic way. I mean, it was something that happened when I was I was abused by a clergy member from the age of about 14 to 18. And I knew it, but back in those days, because I'm in my 50s, back then in the dark ages, nobody talked about this. There was no real vocabulary for it. It wasn't the issue du jour that it is now. I had no place to go. Plus, he was a trusted friend of the family and this respected figure in our community, and no one would have believed me, so I thought. And no one, I just couldn't narc him out, if you will. And I loved him, so it was a huge conflict. Anyway, so that happened. I kind of turned it into a joke. Defense mechanism for comic. Hello. So for years, I sort of stayed in that mode, denying it, not thinking about it, laughing about it if it did ever come up. And then in my, I guess, late 20s, early 30s, I was in New York, and it's uncovered in a very dramatic way, if you will. I was at a Broadway show seeing the play Burn This with John Malkovich. I have no idea how the play ended because there was a very poignant moment in it when the Joan Allen character, he's writing her a letter, and at the end he says, "Burn this." Well, that went through, it started the whole Reintegration Act. And I flew out of the theater, vomited in the streets, because that's exactly what this guy did to me. He would write me letters, pornographic, and they continued for years, even well on after I was an adult and in college. And he would say filth and what he wanted to do and all of this stuff. And then at the end, he would inevitably sign it, P.S., burn this. No one else would understand what we have. And, of course, I did burn all of them. So no evidence. But anyway, when I saw that play Burn This.
Yeah, not surprising.
It, like, pull the string.
Right.
And all those memories flooded back. And then I started really doing the intense work and taking it seriously and going, you know what, this isn't funny anymore. And I started looking at my history of relationships, and they were a train wreck. And I was a little bit overweight at that time. I was smoking, not drinking or anything, never did drugs. But that was enough pain. It was enough pain for me. And thank God mine was not a violent act. But here's the deal. When there's not violence, and it is more subtle, if you will, sometimes you feel like an idiot for mentioning it because it's easy to minimize it and think, well, you know, it's no big deal. Let me just get over it. Yet that gets embedded in your psyche, and it definitely can wreak havoc with your relationships, your psychosexual development, your intimacy issues, and God knows your self-esteem.
Yeah, and that's so common. People just go for years without talking about it, denying it, minimizing it. And especially, I think, when you bring in the whole issue of, you know, it wasn't violent. And in some cases, for many girls, there's a pleasure component, or it's one way that they connect with somebody that they love. And it can make them, in this inappropriate way, feel special, you know, that special feeling.
Absolutely. And here he had this font of knowledge about a subject every human being is curious about. But I grew up in the South, obviously, and in a certain socioeconomic stratus where you didn't talk about that. Sex is something you did after you were married with babies. I never figured out how that was going to happen. But any question I had, any natural question I had, it was poo-pooed, shut up, you know, go away, you'll find out all that later. Well, here was this guy who was dying to share the information with me. So when I do speeches, I always tell parents, please, for God's sakes, if you don't want to talk about this with your kid, find a professional who will, because I can promise you there's someone out there who's going to give your kid the information they want, and they may not deliver it in a way you approve of.
Right. Absolutely. So with your journey then, how is it? Because as a therapist, you know, it's always interesting the subject that you're drawn to. In other words, the specialty that you're drawn to. And I find it a fascinating conversation. It is you, in some ways, you're doing your own healing.
Absolutely.
Through the healing of others. And I've always found that it takes a very conscious person, a very conscious therapist, to know when they can bring in their own personal experience in a way that's going to be very healing and therapeutic for someone, and when their own experience can get in the way of that. And I imagine that I bring this up because a lot of people who are going to get help in this area and go to someone, it's such an important piece of work and healing that needs to take place. How was that for you? You know, how was it to go through your own healing and get healed and feel whole enough so that you could then help others without it, you know, re-triggering you or you projecting your stuff onto them? Kind of, what was that like?
It was the most freeing thing I've ever done. So again, when I started volunteering with these kids at Children of the Night, when I looked into their eyes, I could never judge myself or stay in the shame or guilt or pain, just by looking at them, I thought, you can heal. And then I thought, well, so can I. So that's what allowed me to, all of a sudden, entertainment was not fulfilling for me anymore. So it was over the course of a few weeks, few months, I'd do the clubs at night, the kids by day, and then the scales started tipping. And I just thought, you know what? This is real life. They're kids trying to commit suicide, and they're strung out, and they're pregnant by their pimps. All I'm worried about is who's laughing at my latest joke and how my hair looks and what producer's out there to see me. So I got to be very narcissistic. And then I thought, you know what? There's something else I'm meant to do. Let me use my pain to help heal others and hopefully heal myself. So you're absolutely right. It's very selfish in a way. But that started me on my path. So I went back to school. And in the course of that, I thought, if I really want to heal, it's not just about helping the victims, but it's also about facing the worst fear, which is the perpetrators, finding out what sets them up for behavior. Because not that I'm ever defending anyone's inappropriate sexual behavior like that. Please hear me correctly. I'm a victim myself. But I know what it's like to stay stuck in the anger and hatred and maligning other people and blaming them for years. I didn't want to live stuck in that gear. It was more weakening to me. Did not allow me to move on, have healthier relationships, and heal. What helped me was to, again, face my worst fear and see that they are human and use understanding and compassion. When you can do that, you are absolutely free.
You know, I love this conversation because there's a lot of forgiving that needs to take place in this whole healing process. And it's interesting because when I work with clients all the time, whether it's on a history of abuse or whatever else, and they always say, they feel so guilty. The guilt is, of course, a huge thing. Like, how could I have done this? Could I have done something differently? Why me? What's wrong with me? And all that. And I'll do this. I don't know if you do this in your work, but I'll say, you know what? If they're a parent, it's really easy. Because I'll say, remember your son or your daughter when they were 5 or 9. Or 13, and look at them and just realize how much power, how much life experience, how much confidence, look at what a 5 and an 8-year-old really is.
Right.
And it helps. And if they don't have children, I'll say, go out, find a niece or a nephew, go find your friend, go find a kid and say, that was you.
Yes.
And how could you expect that little person to stand up to someone who is so big and so powerful in their eyes and
manipulative
and so manipulative that
and good at it,
and how you've got to find that forgiveness. And I think that to take that one step further, so that you're not only forgiving yourself, but you're forgiving this other human being that caused you so much harm.
Yes.
Is an incredible gift, but that's a long journey. I don't think that comes easily.
Yeah, what time does that happen? Like naturally, for you or for some of the people that you work with, when do they face their perpetrator, and say, look, what you did, or do they talk to them, or do you just send the authorities out? I mean, what?
Well, every situation's different, but let's say someone has been abused by someone who's already dead. They can still do the healing and confront that person. Of course, they're dead, but there's ways to do that. I use hypnosis a lot, and it's a very safe, and I use a lot of Gestalt methods, so there's a lot of different ways. Every person is different. With me, it took about 10 years to fully get to where I am now, once I started doing the intense work. Had I been able to call and confront my perpetrator over the phone, which I ultimately did, sooner, had I had the right resources, because, again, back then they didn't have it, I would have been freer a lot faster. So not that I think this is a quick fix by any means, but it doesn't have to take 10, 20 years.
Right. What about, for anybody listening to the show, would typically, do they at what point do they contact the authorities? Let's say it happened 5-10 years ago. Do you still call the police? What do you do?
It depends on the state that you're in and the statute of limitations. Now there is no statute of limitations. You can always have somebody arrested for what they did 20, 30 years ago. And especially if they're around children now. Maybe they have grandchildren, or we're all around children at some point. So yeah, you might consider doing that now. I strongly encourage people to do that.
So let's back it up just a second, because I'd like to talk a little bit about what parents can do to have the conversations with their children, to let them know, what are some tips on how they can keep their children safe, and then also what do they do if their child comes to them and says, I'm feeling uncomfortable. You know, sometimes it comes out in this very indirect way.
Absolutely.
So let's start with how can they educate their children to keep them safe?
Well, first of all, they want to have a conversation, with their kids in a non-passionate way. If you get angry and you better let me know if this happens, it's the last thing you want to do. You don't want to make them paranoid or expecting it to happen. You want to have this conversation with the same tone that you talk about fire safety in the house or not walking in the street or things like that. Modesty rules, all of those things in the same conversation, kind of matter of fact. There are a lot of great books for young children because, again, this is such a buzzword out there. So 5-year-olds are coming, Mommy, what's sexual abuse? When they start asking, you want to give them the right information. Fortunately, I have a list there's a lot of great books out there that are very simple that you want to read with your child. Answer any questions, again, almost in a matter-of-fact educational way. If you have trouble doing this, find someone to help you. Because if it happened to you, you want to really check your emotions. You do not want to go overboard because that'll make them expect it. They'll start accusing wrong people of anything. So there's several great books. One is called The Right Touch. One is called It's My Body. One is I Said No. And one is No More Secrets for Me.
Okay, and what I'll do, just to let the viewers know, is I'll make sure I put that on my blog,
Right.
so that they can come to the website, go to the radio show link, and they'll get that information. I'll put it up there.
Great.
Okay.
And I think this subject with older kids who have learned about menstruation and birth control and actual sexual activity, we need to have a component in sex education that talks about psychosexual development. There's so much more to sex than just penises and vaginas. There's so much more than birth control. There's the whole emotional aspect and knowing when you're ready. And most important of all, respect for other human beings. Respect for the opposite gender or the same gender. Respect for all people. That's what's missing.
And, I think it's really important for parents also who have had a history of their own abuse to be really in check about their denial. I remember being in college and having this friend, and she had a pretty extensive history of having been sexually abused by her father. And here I was in my early 20s, so before I was in graduate school and all this stuff. And I remember when she was sharing this with me, I knew her whole family. I mean, her dad was a great guy. I mean, you would have never known. But she went on to have a child, and I remember that she would be sending her daughter off to her parents for overnights. They would spend the weekend with grandparents.
Wow.
And I would question her. I would say, do you really think do you think he's safe? And this is where you have to be careful about how you can deny and distort things.
Sure.
Because in her mind, she felt like, she said, no, I'm sure it was just me. She got into that I was the special one. And because I was so special that it would just be confined to who I am. So there was a lot of interesting psychological dynamics going on.
Absolutely. And many of them use that as a tool to keep you true to them. You're the only one. We're so special. And kids at that age buy it. They believe it, especially when they're that vulnerable and they're in an intimate situation.
Yeah, I think people have a misunderstanding where they think that it's much more coercive,
right?
And that someone's going to threaten, don't tell your mom, or I'm going to kill your family. I mean, there are things that maybe from someone who is, maybe an outside, but when people are either in the family or close to the family, it's not. It's the manipulation is actually a seduction. It's very positive. There's nothing scary about it. Would you not agree with that?
Absolutely. It's charming. It's fun. It's creative. It's educational. You feel special. You're getting the attention you crave. They're very good at picking the lonely, vulnerable child. And it's really, I'm glad you touched on that because, people do have this heuristic. The media puts that out that, they're forcing you. They're holding you down. There's weapons involved and they're tearing you and it is just force and it's horrible. That's like 1% of the crimes that are reported, of course, who knows? But it's about 1% that are violent, that end up killing them, etc. Far and away, it's done with tenderness, and it's usually a systemic family cycle.
Right. And if a child, and again, of course, there's such a strong motivator to not say anything. There's actually much more motivation to not say something from the child's perspective or a teenager perspective than to say something. But if you have those conversations, and you've already told your children that you are a safe person to come to with anything, and they know you don't get, so crazy, so if a child comes and starts to give you some indication that something's wrong, like,
Yes.
all of a sudden they don't want to go to their piano lessons anymore.
Honor that.
And so what's the best thing that a parent can do to facilitate that conversation? And, what is the first step? Because I think a lot of parents think, okay, first of all, if it's a spouse, there's tons at risk. You know what I mean? That gets very complicated. If it's a close family member, there's tons at stake. So what do you suggest a parent do to not overreact, but not underreact?
Exactly. The last thing you want to do is lead your child or teenager. You don't want to suggest anything. He's not hurting you, is he? He's not touching you, is he?
Right,
You want to have
right.
open-ended questions and just, how come you don't like this piano teacher? Is it the piano? Is it the teacher? Can we pick another day of the week? Is it the pieces you're choosing? So they answer the questions. And if they say, well, I just don't like the teacher, what is it about him or her? Always open-ended, like you're a policeman. You don't want to suggest anything, because then they can feed into it, and that's where false memories come in and false accusations. We don't want to do that.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, look for behavioral changes, because they don't always say anything, especially if you're in a house where there's a lot of rules and a lot of blame, like, oh, girls that get knocked up when they're teenagers are bad. I never would have said anything about being sexually involved as a teenager, because I heard that. It's always the girl's fault. Was kind of a rule in our house. So you want to look for behavioral changes. Had somebody looked at how I was starting to gain weight and my grades were getting worse, I was, what else was I doing? Probably a lot more sarcastic, which a lot of teenagers are, so that one's kind of hard. But you definitely want to look for appetite changes, sleep, who they're hanging out with, their speech patterns, if they're kind of in a daze, if they're over or under eating, if there's any drug use, of course.
Yeah, and we also want to be careful, because I know, teenagers go through hard times, period. So you want to be careful. That just because your teenager is demonstrating some of these symptoms doesn't mean that that's going on.
Exactly.
But of course, as we know, that's an indicator to have a conversation regardless.
Yes, you want to open that door and look what's back there.
Yeah, and you want to get involved. Now, there's controversy in my position on this, but it is my position, and my kids have known it's my position. My position is that I honestly, raising my children, did not believe that they were entitled to privacy, in the sense that if there was something going on with like say my older daughter went through a rough time, and I knew she had a journal, boy, I was in that journal. Now, and there's some people who look at me and they'll say, "Oh my God, how can you not?" I said, "Are you kidding me? My first job is to keep her safe."
Oh yeah, I can't imagine. I have people close to me where they cannot access their kids' Facebook account, MySpace. That's all password protected, and they are not allowed in there. And I'm like, I can't imagine, like, if and these kids, some of them are already having sex, at 14, 15, 16 years old. So it's like, how could you, I don't understand how parents out there, I mean, how do you guys, like, just say, well, it's their privacy and whatever, when they're your child living in your home, underage, under 18 years old, they're living in your home, and the parent's duty is to raise these kids. And that now there's obviously something secretive going on if it's all password protected. I mean, why do parents allow that to happen? It boggles my mind.
Yeah, parents need to parent. That's my take on it. And until your kid is of legal age and off in their own life, you have control, and you need to exert that control in an appropriate way. So I've
heard them say, well, we pick our battles, and she's a good girl and she doesn't do this and that, so we got to pick our battles.
Well, sometimes you have to be, strategic. It's lucky when you have more than one sibling, you can have, one sibling, getting you information on the other. I tell you, I'll get into a lot of trouble. But
I think at that age, it's good to tell your teenage daughter or son exactly what's going on in the world in a very, again, matter-of-fact way, and say, look, here's what's going on. Here's what you need to know before you play on Facebook and you're flirting. Certain people do this, this, and this. You make your own choice. If you tell them what to do or what not to do, you know what teenagers are going to do. They're going to rebel. Yeah. So empower them to make their own healthy choice. But if you tell them what the consequences are, and this works with smoking and eating wrong things and drinking too much, with everything, you want to tell them what the consequences are and that you trust them to make the best decision for themselves.
Yeah. And I think, again, this issue that people who maybe harming your kids are not bad. I put this in quotes. You know, they're
Sure.
not bad people, and they're usually trusted people in the community, and that's a huge
I know.
piece of it. So,
So couldn't some of that get uncovered too? I mean, if the parent had access to, because it's so easy to say and do things and promise things and whatever on the internet.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, isn't that another reason why there shouldn't be passwords for the kids that the parents can't get into? I mean,
Absolutely.
yeah.
I
How do
completely agree.
What kind of advice would you guys give to parents that are listening that right now they don't have access to their kids' Facebook accounts? They can't get in there and see what comments people are making. What, you know, and then they say, well, you know, it's too late now. They already have this set, and I can't go back, or whatever excuse they give. I mean, what can you say to them to say, you know what, maybe we should open up and we can help protect our kids from these predators if we have access to their MySpace or Facebook accounts?
you know what I've always told my kids is I said, I trust you. My issue is not with you. It's the world that
Right.
I don't necessarily trust all the time. And like it or not, as smart as you are, you simply still have the judgment and life experience of a 14-year-old, a 15-year-old, a 16-year-old. And that's how I've explained it. And I think they get that. Do you think,
Yes.
Nancy? I think kids they
Yes.
get that.
And you don't want to use absolute scare tactics and say there's these perverts, these horrible people out there, because that's feeding the fear. And also, in some ways, it may titillate them more. You want to say there's people that do certain behaviors and share what they are and say, but they have an issue. They have a disorder. They need help. You know, we need to have some compassion for them and hope that they will seek help, but not to feed that. But yeah, absolutely. I would not let a teenager of mine have a password and block me from information in this day and age. Mm-mm.
If
No.
you have a question, we are here, and we encourage you to call in with your comments or your questions. You can call in now at 323-247-7443. That's 323-247-7443. And call in now, and you can also call in after the break, because we'll be taking a break here in just a little bit. So when we get back from break, Nancy, what I'd like us to talk a little bit about is, okay, so a child has gone through this experience, and they're in adulthood. And how, what are some of the ways that this is going to impact their really, let's talk primarily about their ability to form and maintain a healthy relationship. And then what are some of the things that they can do to start that healing process so that they have a chance to really create the kind of relationships that they deserve in their life and get all the love that they deserve. So, okay, so we are going to take a break. We will be back in just 2 minutes. You are watching Pathways to Love. I am your host, Julie Orlov, and we'll be right back.
Way up on that mountain, children.
you suffer from degenerative diseases such as high blood pressure, diabetes, fibroid tumors, high cholesterol, genital herpes, or a plethora of other diseases that rob you of a quality life? If so, then visit the website of herbalist Tahuti Ma'atra at dhealthstore.com and open the door to natural healing at an affordable price. dhealthstore.com has over 1,800 products created by herbalist Tahuti Ma'atra, specifically designed to help you heal the natural and safe way. At dhealthstore.com, you'll find everything from herbal formulas and cleanses, such as Tahuti's famous Full Body Detox, as well as herbal teas, extracts, natural body butters, lotions, creams, children's products, hair care products, and of course, sexual enhancement products for both men and women. So visit the website of Tahuti Ma'atra, dhealthstore.com, or call toll free at 1-888-823-9416. dhealthstore.com.
Are you ready to enjoy the Maui lifestyle? You can have it all by owning real estate on the Paradise Island of Maui. Dennis Rush, a 22-year Maui resident and real estate broker, brings his wealth of experience and market knowledge to add value to your Maui real estate understanding, providing a level of service as unique and exceptional as the island of Maui itself. The magical island of Maui was voted the most exclusive resort island in the world by Condé Nast Traveler, and keep in mind, Maui is only a simple, non-stop flight away. Hawaii Business Magazine Top 100 Realtors awarded Dennis Rush the 2011 fourth top realtor on the island of Maui. Go to www.dennisrush.com to view all of the amazing properties currently available in the Maui MLS system. Whatever your needs or desires, Dennis Rush will provide a private consultation for any Maui properties your heart desires. You will be in good hands. Once again, go to www.dennisrush.com. That's www.dennisrush.com. Contact Dennis today to start your Maui lifestyle now. Dennis Rush, proud sponsors of the Dawn Christie Show and LA Talk Live.
Okay, welcome back, everyone. You are watching Pathways to Love. I am your host, Julie Orlov, and I am here today with Dr. Nancy Irwin and Stephen Tako. We are talking about overcoming childhood sexual abuse, and I think the message, if nothing else, that we want to get out there today is that this is a subject that it is okay to talk about it. So whether you want to talk about how to keep your children safe with your children, have an open, relaxed conversation. And if you are having any kind of struggles with something that's happened to you in the past and you haven't spoken to anyone yet, or if you have and it didn't go well, please do not keep quiet. This isn't so important to have an open conversation and really share your story so that you can really begin to heal. So Nancy, before the break, I said I wanted to really go into, so adulthood. So if children have had this experience, what are some of the ways that that's going to show up in their adult relationships, particularly their sexual relationships? Because it's hard for it not to.
Exactly. Many times they have extreme difficulty being intimate, and I don't mean just being sexual. There's a big difference. Mm-hmm. Sometimes they have extreme difficulty, and that's the most common complaint I hear, especially from the adult men. We live in a culture, and that's grossly underreported. Right. Because young teenage boys having sex with their biology teacher, all right, they're trained to get it whenever they can, if you will.
If it's a female teacher.
Right. Yeah. Or maybe not if they're gay. That happens. Yeah. Exactly, sure. Especially if she's hot. Then, I would have loved my teacher to do that to me is some of the common thinking now. Trust me. 20 years later when they're married and they have difficulty with boundary issues. Because what happens is, I know physically it feels good to the young boys especially, girls too, but particularly the boys. What happens is they pair the illicitness of it, the inappropriate relationship, the power issue with sexual excitement. Mm-hmm. So when it's an appropriate relationship, if you will, they can't be sexual. That's too boring. That is the greatest danger of all, I think. I mean, it can certainly lead to other things, but I can't tell you how many times that shows up. And it's so frustrating. Here they were, the beautiful woman, and they don't want to make love to her because it's appropriate.
Right, right. And I think for women, you know, I've heard several different impacts of this. In other words, some women start to act out sexually too much.
Yes.
You know, and other women, they want to stay as far as away from a sexual, intimate relationship as possible. And the whole issue of intimacy.
Yes.
You know, being intimate really requires you to be open about your most vulnerable self. And if you're carrying a secret around with you that's filled with shame or guilt, you know, how can you?
Yeah. And you mentioned that promiscuity and then complete frigidity, and some people seesaw between the two.
Mm-hmm.
Really, really conflicting.
How do people, like, if somebody's, okay, for example, somebody has mentioned to me, they think, you know what, I bet you were like, you know, I bet you that you were molested when you were younger. Just, you know, after talking to me about some things, you know, I've talked to a couple of therapists about some issues, whatever, you know, and I've had a couple people make that suggestion. Have you ever been molested when you were younger? And I'm like, no, you know, and they're like, well, thinking that maybe I'm like shameful or I'm hiding or whatever. I'm like, no, actually, if I have something to share with you, I have no reason to not talk to you about it. I mean, I would share with you, you know. So, you know, you talked earlier about, you know, leading people on, whatever. I mean, what if you suspect that somebody really has been molested and yet this person is not coming out and saying anything?
Well, first of all, let's define what molestation is, because, and I'm glad you brought that up, because I've seen this working with perpetrators. And as people probably know, again, I'm not defending their behavior, but believe me, nobody chooses to be a pedophile or a child molester, and there is a difference. The latter is an opportunist. It happens to be that way. They're in between marriages. They're frustrated, whatever. A pedophile really thinks they're in love with kids. Truly, and that's what happened to me. He was tracing me for years. He really thought he was in love with me. But anyway, with some of the molesters I've worked with, you know, well, that's part of the recovery work. It's like, you know, what is your whole sexual history? Were you ever any sexual trauma? Were you ever molested? Oh, no. And then we start scratching the surface, and they just didn't define it as such.
I'm not a molester, by the way. I have no...
Yes, thank you for disclaiming that.
Yeah.
But my point is, there are some other symptoms that can show, and maybe something happened to you that wasn't hands-on abuse. Did anyone show you pornography, for instance?
Well, when I was a little kid, I will tell you, I'm like my later 40s, but I remember I used to go to like the drugstores, right? Mm-hmm. And I remember I was a kid, like, you know, 5 to 8 years old or whatever, and they used to put all the dirty magazines on the bottom row for some reason, right? Like right where kids are, you know.
Sure.
And so, and they weren't all in wrappers back then either, you know. So my mom, this happened many times. My mom would be looking around the store trying to find where I am, and she'd go over to the magazines, and there I would be all crouched down, you know, looking at dirty magazines as a little kid.
Right. And many people would say that's child abuse, showing pornography. I can't tell you how many people come into my office because they're addicted to pornography, and someone shared that with them when they were kids, but they never touched them. You can also just look at a child, watching them bathe, watching them get dressed, and looking at them lasciviously. What's his name? The famous therapist. I can't think of his name. The one that did all the inner child work. I did a workshop with him, but he did the same thing. He's also Southern, John something. Anyway, that happened to him. His mother would actually bend over and show her breasts when he was bathing, and then ask him to take her bra off. Never really touched him, but instructed him to touch her and disrobe her, and then she'd walk out and smile, and that was her way of feeling powerful. That's sexually abusive.
Right. Well, you know, I as an adult male, I have to be like really cautious when I'm around like kids and whatever. Like I remember one time my sister asked me to go in and watch her daughters, right? And they were like, you know, 5, 3, and 1 or something, you know, whatever. They were all in the bathtub together, right? So she, hey, can you make sure that they're okay, right? So I'm standing there and I'm crouched down and I'm making sure they get their little rubber duckies and whatever, you know. The oldest one goes to me, she goes, "You have a penis," right? I immediately stood up, and I walked out of the room, you know, and I said, somebody else needs to watch these kids.
Well, and I think that speaks to how we need as a society to get more comfortable with sexuality and not, I mean, it's not that we want to.
Kinsey. that who you're looking for, Kinsey?
No.
No.
Sorry. Go ahead.
That's okay. I know what that's like. It finally comes up, and you don't want to lose it. So, but the point is to get comfortable with our sexuality and healthy with our sexuality and appropriate with, how we give and receive love, how we understand power. I mean, it's such a complex issue, and we have a lot of work to do in this country. We're just kind of messed up, in my opinion, in this country about all that.
Oh, yeah. But yeah, you're right. See, that could have been such a sweet moment. That was perfectly innocent, and there's nothing wrong with you bathing 3 little girls. Now, if that happened again, here's what you can do that would make it light and fun and beautiful. Obviously, somebody's instructed her well, because you do want to let your kids know the proper name for their genitals.
Right.
Scientific name, so that if someone does touch them inappropriately, they see that they're working with somebody who knows something. So she said, you have a penis. It would have been great if you could have come back and said, and you have a vagina. And then gone on playing, bathing. Just like, well, yeah, that's the truth.
I know. It's like, I would be so fearful of all of a sudden that kid going in and goes, Uncle Steven said I have a vagina.
Right. Well, and I guess, and that's part of the problem. I mean, that's the other extreme of it. We're now so hypersensitive that everybody can be jumping over nothing. But yeah, and so what are some of the steps that someone can take to start their healing process and really move into a place where they, aren't run by their past in this way, and they can have the relationships that they really want and desire.
Right. Well, there's a lot of workshops, there's a lot of books, but of course, if you want to do in-depth one-on-one with someone, find a good counselor, somebody you really click with. It could be a spiritual leader, but somebody who's got experience with this and will honor your path, that you can be completely honest with and share if you were excited when it was happening. Someone shared at the break that they had a friend that this happened to, and the person was very afraid to share what happened because they enjoyed the experience at age 13. Our bodies do respond because we're sexual creatures. I mean, I don't know what the statistics are, but there's certainly a large number of people who are raped who have orgasm. It doesn't mean they enjoyed the act, but your body is trained to react the way it normally does. It doesn't know the difference always between trauma and pleasure. So if people do enjoy it, and I admit I certainly did, certain aspects of it, and then the guilt and the shame and the boundaries, and I knew it was wrong, it's highly, highly conflicting. So know that you're not alone. Find somebody to work with and go through the phases.
And really, the key here is to find the right professional to work with. I'm just going to emphasize this over and over again, because people can have a secondary trauma. Sure. And that's a lot of what happens when kids go to somebody for help. And there's a secondary trauma because they're not believed, or, people can be angry for someone saying such a thing because they don't want the family, a system uprooted.
Sure.
There's so many things. So that healing process, I really believe that finding a person who knows how to listen, who will not judge, and who knows how to take you gently through those phases of grief and healing in a way. And actually, part of it, I think, really is having help understanding what is an appropriate boundary.
Exactly.
How can you love someone and have someone love you and understand that you're able to set your boundaries and set limits with them, and vice versa. And, all those kinds of things. I think it's really, really important.
Yeah. And the earlier the better. The earlier the intervention, the less damage there is.
Yeah. Now, I can't help but really go into the whole issue of treating perpetrators because, first of all, there aren't a lot of professionals that do that. I am amazed at how many therapists can treat I think what happens is professionals themselves can identify or over-identify with survivors, that they themselves have a hard time separating and becoming compassionate and understanding that the perpetrator is a human being as well. And there's a lot of pain that's behind and involved with all this behavior. So I really applaud you. I can't tell you how much I applaud you for working with that population. And thank you. That's right.
It's fascinating.
Well, and there's a whole question, as you are well aware of in the therapy profession, about how much is a pedophile curable versus not, and there's a lot of interesting thoughts out there. So I'm very curious to hear, what has your experience been? What is your take on treating perpetrators?
Well, I find it very fascinating, and I'm committed to being a part of the solution rather than focusing on the horror of the problem. It's a choice. And you'd be surprised how many of us in the field do come from the same background. Not all, but a lot. Or they know someone who did, so they're committed to making a difference here. To answer your question, pedophilia is not curable, but it is manageable. You ask anybody on the street, what do you think the recidivism rate is? And that means repeat offense for pedophiles, child molesters, any sex offenders. What do you think their repeat percentages are once they're released from prison? Anybody here want to venture a guess?
Oh, I would probably say it's very high if it's from prison.
They were released from prison, like when they would have sex again with a kid?
Right. If they're arrested for rape or child molestation or kiddie porn distribution, what do you think their repeat offense rate is?
I don't have a clue.
I would say
30%?
I would say it's very high. I would say 80, 90%.
Really?
Most people think that. And I'm happy to say it's really the opposite. It's closer, it's between 5 and 13% with treatment.
Okay, with treatment. There you go.
With treatment,
okay.
between
I'm thinking they just had incarceration. Okay.
Well, unfortunately, California at this moment, we're fixing to get this, but at this moment, they don't have sex offender treatment in prison. Post, yes. And that's very successful. And that's what I've done, is work with court-mandated sex offenders.
So are you in favor then of an offender being on the
registry?
The registry for the rest of their life?
No, because here's why. There's something like 95,000 sex offenders in the state of California on the registry right now. I can tell you right now that probably, I have no idea what percentage, but it's a great many do not need to be on there. It was a first-time offense. It was very minor. What they should do is demand that they have treatment. Then they probably won't beat again. But the registry is very middle-age punishment for people. It wrecks their lives.
I have a friend that his life has been wrecked, and he was 19 years old, and he ended up like fondling or was doing some stuff with a 14-year-old boy or something like that, right? One time only. He was 19. He was kind of curious or whatever, and just got. And for the rest of his life, and it's been a long time, and he has to, every time he moves somewhere, he has to be all registered, and he can't live, here and there, and the news, some newscasters actually found out that he lives, and they showed up at his house. He's getting groceries out of his car, and they're there sticking a microphone in his face, and it's just like awful.
Everybody has the right to rehab. Everybody has the right to rehabilitate, to get forgiveness. The state of California forgives you and lets you out of prison. The people around you need to do that too. It would be fair if we had a registry for murderers, because which would you rather have, your kid sexually abused or murdered? Why would the murderer not be on a registry and have to be watched the rest of his life?
To make a choice on that one.
Really.
But that's not fair.
I think what people need to understand is when you work with a perpetrator, okay, is there remorse? Is there pain? What goes on in their minds before, because I think people don't understand necessarily the dynamics that go around this compulsive behavior, because it really can be quite compulsive. So can you share that information so that people can understand what's behind the act?
Yeah, because
what's
again,
in the human being.
Nobody chooses to be that way, although studies are coming up now where there may be a genetic marker to be attracted to kids. And it's been around for centuries, so you could say it's natural in that it is found in nature. That being said, even if it's inappropriate, because a lot of things found in nature are inappropriate, violent tendencies, etc. So it certainly is something that can be controlled. The way treatment works is, and to answer your question, many of them do have a great deal of remorse. They live in a hot hell, not only because they're afraid they're going to get caught, but they don't know how to get treatment and admit their crimes because they're afraid. There's no place we're all mandated reporters. Somebody comes and says, I'm sleeping with my daughter, we have to report them.
Right.
There's not a safe place right now for them to get help before they act out or right when they're beginning to. We need to close that window and give people treatment before it gets worse, before it's too late. But yes, to answer your question, certainly a lot of them feel remorseful. They just don't know how to get out of that cycle.
Yeah, and some, they're again, not, there's a whole spectrum. It isn't just one size fits all with this.
Of course.
With this issue, and I think that for some perpetrators, my understanding is that it is an inner demon, and it feels like an inner demon. And then you can have other people that I feel like this is more of that pathological, DNA that's in them. That, it's a pressure, a stress that starts to build, and then it's the release, it's the buildup, and it's doing all this stuff, all the seduction, all that is this continuous buildup, and then once they have the act and they have the sexual release, there's this huge release, and then the cycle starts again.
Absolutely. The more stress they have, the more they want to act out. The more they act out, the guiltier they feel, the more stress they have, and on and on. So we get them off that merry-go-round by keeping their stress levels down. So more to the point about the registry, that does nothing but increase the stress, and is probably encouraging more sex crimes than ever would have been.
Yeah, he actually says that if it wasn't for, he had to check in, and they have to talk and and go through all these things. He goes, they keep bringing it up. He goes, this is like my past. This is something I did like 30 years ago or 20 years ago or whatever, right? And he's like, they keep bringing it up to me as if it's like just happened.
Yes.
And they're like, then they're saying, well, you're in denial if you're not saying that this is an issue in your life or whatever, and he's like, he's kind of like, over. Then he's like paranoid, like, why am I being trapped in this? Why are you continuing to bring this up? And then they say, well, we're concerned now that you're talking this way because you're not, you're in denial that this is actually happening to you.
Right. And they just don't understand. I mean, think of a mistake you may have made 20, 30 years ago. The worst thing you've ever done. How would you like to be defined by that
Exactly.
and have it published for the rest of your life?
Yeah.
It's like being an alcoholic. Let's say somebody, because it's addictive behavior that can be managed. Nobody chooses to be an alcoholic, but they can recover. How would you like it if you've been sober 30 years and I was like, oh, don't even look at that bottle of vodka. Don't come to my house for my cocktail party. You can't be trusted. And have that, broadcast over the internet and have your picture displayed all over the place and defined by that. Something you have managed very well.
Right.
Because that's what's going on. And I'm not minimizing the condition. The registry can be helpful, but we've got to change it. We need to have a tiered effect where they're on the registry for maybe 5 years. If they're offense-free, they do the work of treatment and they satisfy all of that, then they're released. Some people should stay on it for life, absolutely.
Well, again, that's the problem.
Right.
We have this one size fits all.
Yeah, if it's like repeat offenders type of thing, then yeah.
And the category is so broad, you have no idea if it's somebody who's falsely accused, and that happens a lot, or if it's somebody who really is a child rapist and murderer.
Right. And it's interesting because I've found that the same continuum operates from the perspective of the victim, for lack of a better word. I'll use the word victim. Because I have worked with women that have had horrendous histories of abuse. I mean, just horrible stories. And their ability to survive and have families and live productive lives, and it does not define their life. It's incredible what they can overcome and survive and thrive from.
Yes.
And then I've also had clients over the years where they've had I mean this really with all due respect, relatively speaking, less traumatic, very mild forms, not to take away from what that is, no matter what. But they've let it completely define their lives.
Of course.
Completely.
They identify with that.
Right. And so I think it's it's that interesting, what is it in the human being on both ends? What is it in the human being that allows something to define their lives and run their lives versus what is it in the human being that says, this happened to me, it wasn't good, or I have this problem and it's not good, and yet I'm also have the power and the motivation and the inspiration to, to not let it define me or run me.
Right. And I did for years. I was Vicky victim for years because I got a lot of attention. It was a very convenient excuse to use for anything. I got to the point if I had a flat tire, well, that was the molester's fault.
Right.
And I finally got, seriously, I got so sick of my story. And I'm like, I got a choice. I can either, and I would never say tacitly, this, like, get over it. It was a process. And it needs to be dealt with very sensitively. But you have a choice where you want to stay defined in that box and you do get attention for it. But what kind of attention do you want? and use it as an excuse to move on. Or you can be free. Not excusing anyone's behavior, but understanding it and letting the pain go and keeping the meaning of that tragedy, if you will.
Right. And to really get very attuned to being able to separate out the child that's in you that still, has those memories and experienced it versus the adult that is now in charge, really is in charge of your life and living your life on a day-to-day basis.
And that's exactly how I work. I have people, I take them to the point of when they were victimized, say 14, and maybe they're 30 years old now. I have the 30-year-old in hypnosis or in Gestalt techniques to restore that relationship so they are properly parenting that lost 14-year-old.
Right.
And it's really amazing work.
Right.
Very freeing.
What is the Gestalt method? You've mentioned it a couple times now. What is that again? I've heard it before.
It's a German technique. It really has no translation, but it's essentially the sum of the parts. So you reintegrate the child with the adult. It's just amazing what you sort of pull out the or insert the missing pieces so you repair the damage and allow the instrument to flow freely, if you will.
I think some of the popular conceptions of Gestalt therapy, and especially from the 70s, it was really big in the 70s, where you would have, you put the pillow on the couch and you say, now this is, your mother or whatever. This is our different parts of the family or different parts of yourself. And you actually work with all those different parts. It's got a lot of creativity, but yeah.
Absolutely.
There's a lot of different,
healing.
there's a lot of different things you can do with it. Yeah. So, well, is there anything else that we can leave our viewers with? Is there any message that you want to get out there to help people who have been touched by this issue in one way or another?
Yeah, thank you. Mostly just to know that there is hope. There is healing for this. There's a lot of people are plugged into the negative belief. There's the worst thing in the world that can happen. They'll never recover. And I really, really hate that message because that is not true. There is always healing. I'm a big fan of the belief that, you can't really appreciate being rich unless you've been poor. Can't really appreciate being slender unless you've been overweight. So people who have been sexually abused have a wonderful capacity to reclaim their natural birthright for a healthy sexuality, and they will appreciate it more because they know what it's like to be on the other end.
That's great. All right, Nancy. So
thank you.
Yeah, nice way to look at it, Very nice. Yeah.
So Nancy is also the author of U-Turn, Changing Direction in Midlife. So it just goes to tell you, midlife rocks. And it's one of the most powerful times that anyone can have. And if people want to get in touch with you or they want to get your book, how can they do that?
U-Turn, and that's spelled Y-O-U. It's a visual because you turn your life around. Right. That is available on Amazon.com. If they want to contact me by phone, I'm in Los Angeles, West Los Angeles, and that's 310-235-2882. Or they can email me, Nancy Irwin at earthlink.net, or check out my website, which is drnancyrwin.com.
And again, all this information can be found at julieorlov.com. Just click on the radio show icon on the sidebar. We'll take you to this show's information, and you can have all that information. Remind me, I'll put those books down there as well.
Perfect.
And Stephen, where can people get in touch with you?
Well, I actually have a YouTube channel. So if somebody searches my name, Stephen, S-T-E-P-H-E-N, Tako, T-A-K-O, on YouTube, you'll find all kinds of my motivational tapes, motivational videos on there, and also some of my craziness that I do in my acting world as well. I do have a small role on Oz, so I saw myself playing one of the Wicked Witch's guards.
Yay!
So that was very exciting. So, and I was in Gangster Squad recently. So working on some good work there, and just my book. Brought a copy of it. Motivated to Act. Just really inspired. It's kind of funny, because what your book is about people in their midlife. And they're making a change, and same thing with my book. It's like so many people go through their lives, and they just kind of fall into some career that really wasn't suited for them. And so Motivated to Act is to help people act upon their true passions and dreams in life.
Yeah, I think there's some synchronicity between those two books,
I love it.
Yeah. Very good. Very good. And again, if you need to reach me, you can always contact me through my website, julieorlov.com, or thepathwaytolove.com. And next week, I just wanted to let people know that next week we're going to have what I call the Shrink is In show.
Ooh.
So if you, that would be me. Ooh. And of course,
Fun.
Stephen will chime in with all his wisdom and lovely sense of humor. So if you have a question, this is the time to ask. So you can either send it to me by email, you can contact me through the website, you can give us a call. Whatever you want to do, you can call the day of the show, but this is your time to ask any question that you want, because I'll come up with a response for you, I promise. All right. I want to thank everyone for listening today. This has been a really important show. Thank you for being here, Nancy.
Oh, thank you. My pleasure.
And thank you for joining, Stephen, and sharing your stories. I really appreciate that.
You bet.
Yeah. We are here every Friday at 2:30 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. We will be here next Friday. Again, send me your questions at julie@julieorlov.com, or you can also find me on Facebook at Julie Orlov Relationship Builder. Got to remember what that is. Okay. All right, everyone, have a great week. Stay well, and we will see you here next Friday on Pathways to Love. Goodbye, everybody.
Are you watching your children playing after school? They seem to be so unaware of, I know, the things that they'll soon have to take care of. We've got to do something, yeah, to save the children. Soon it will be their turns to try and save the world. Right now they seem to play such a small part of